Chapter 13 is all about buying merchandise, which is technically step 6 in the merchandise planning process. So while Chapter 12 focused on all of the steps in the process that buyers go through to determine what and how much merchandise to buy, we're going to start today by talking about how retailers actually acquire their merchandise. So we're going to start by talking about the different merchandise branding options that are available to retailers. We'll discuss a couple issues that are involved with acquiring merchandise, and we'll talk about the importance of developing and maintaining strong relationships with your vendors. So let's start with brand alternatives. Buyers face a strategic decision about the mix of national brand products and private label products that they should offer in each of their product categories. And so there are lots of kind of brands that the retailer can choose from, and national brands are those brands that are designed, produced, and marketed by a vendor and sold to a retailer. So in the case of national brands, the vendor is responsible for developing the merchandise, producing it, and maintaining consistent quality. And then the vendor is also responsible for building the marketing plan to establish a brand image. And so national brands are all of the brands that you are familiar with that are sold at multiple retailers. So everything from Charmin toilet paper, Bounty paper towels, Gain laundry detergent, Pampers diapers, Tervis tumblers is one, Yeti would be a national brand. So these are all of the branded products that are sold at multiple retailers. Now, vendors often use an umbrella brand associated with their company, and then they have sub-brands for each of their products. And so an example here would be Kellogg's. So Kellogg's is an umbrella brand. It's a national brand that's an umbrella brand. And Kellogg's then produces lots of sub-brands within their products. So Kellogg's makes Fruit Loops, Corn Flakes, Rice Krispies. They also make things like Pop-Tarts and Nutri-Grain bars and Cheez-Its and Animal Crackers and Rice Krispie treats. So Kellogg's is a national umbrella brand, and then they make multiple national sub-brands as well. So you might have heard of Johnson & Johnson. That would be an umbrella brand, and then they have multiple sub-brands beneath them. So this is something, if you want to, you can talk about in the discussion board for Chapter 13, an umbrella brand that you're familiar with, or look up an umbrella brand that you might not be familiar with and look at all the sub-brands they make and see if anything there pops out or surprises you. The reason that vendors often use individual brand names for product categories and do not associate their brands with their companies is because it's easier to remember individual brand names for individual products. So that Johnson & Johnson example I gave you, Johnson & Johnson is the umbrella brand or their company name, and then they make products like Band-Aid and Benadryl and Neutrogena. So it's just easier for customers to associate the sub-brand names. So most retailers carry national brands. At least to some extent, they'll carry national brands in their stores, and we'll talk about why in just a minute. But first, I want to introduce to you store brands or private label brands. And these are products that are developed by the retailer. So a retailer is going to develop the design and specifications for a product, and then they're going to work with the manufacturer to produce it. So they're going to come up with the specs, the sizes, the style, the colors, everything, and then they're going to work with a manufacturer to produce that product for them. And that product then is only available at that specific retailer. So you can't get it anywhere else. It's a unique product. Sometimes what a retailer will do if they don't have the ability to develop a completely brand new product, what they'll do is they will work with a national brand retailer, a national brand vendor, and then they'll develop a special version of a standard piece of merchandise that could be sold exclusively there. So this is where you get into like the designers who only sell a certain selection of their clothes to like a Target or Payless shoe store. And so you get that there. What's interesting is that the Percentage of private label products that are bought by consumers continues to increase each year, and the percentage of branded products decreases each year. And in Europe, store brands have just as much, if not more, value than national brands. In the United States, however, consumers do still show some preference for national brands. So let's talk about how private label brands have increased in both quality and value to the consumer. You might be familiar with what we refer to as premium store brands. So Kroger actually offers 3 levels of store brands or private labels. And the first is their premium store brand, which is their private selection. And so private selection is manufactured to be the same level or even a higher level of quality as the national brand products. So it's meant to compete directly with those national brand products. The next level would be the exclusive store brands. And these are brands that are developed by the national brand retailer in conjunction with a specific retailer and sold exclusively. So it's the Vera Wang for Kohl's, the Estee Lauder for Kohl's, the American Rag is at Macy's, right? And then you also have what we call the copycat store brands. And these copycat store brands are meant to imitate national brand in appearance and packaging, but generally they're perceived as lower quality as some of the national brands, and they are usually offered at lower prices. So at Walmart, this is where you have your great value products. At Kroger, it might be the Kroger brand or the brand. Walgreens has Nice, Target has Up and Up. So it's pretty much anything you can find at a grocery store or a drugstore. You can find the national brand and you can find a copycat store brand there as well. So my question is, do you prefer national brands or store brands and why? And I want you to think about this and talk about it in the discussion boards because it's very interesting. There's some products that hands down, I'm going to buy the national brand every time. To me, it just tastes better. I just prefer it, right? But there are other products where it doesn't really matter and I buy the store brand. So I want to hear what products that you might choose the store brand over the national brand or where you might choose a national brand over a store brand. Another way to expand that discussion in the Chapter 13 discussion boards is to think about how you shop versus how your parents shop and how your grandparents shop. Does one group buy more of a national brand or more of a store brand, and what does that shopping look like there? So just something for you to consider in the discussion boards. Before we wrap up this video, I do want to talk about some advantages of carrying the national brand in your store, and then we'll also look at the advantages of carrying the private label brand. But there's a reason why retailers carry both national brands and store brands. They both have their pros and their cons. So let's start by talking about the advantages of carrying a national brand product in your store. One of the biggest advantages is that it does build traffic flow. So people are familiar with national brands. And so, Jif peanut butter, right, might bring you into a retail store because you know that peanut butter is a good peanut butter. Right? So if consumers know you carry their favorite national brands, they might be more likely to shop with you. Another advantage is that it does reduce selling and promotion expenses. And when we introduced the national brand, and I gave you that definition, as part of that definition, I explained that national brands have to do a lot of their own marketing. So when you see a Charmin toilet paper commercial, it's all about the product. It's all about Charmin toilet paper. So it's not done by a specific retailer, right? So national brands do a lot of their own advertising and retailers can benefit from that, and they don't have to advertise those products as much. Another advantage is that it is desired by customers. And I put the asterisk here because I do think, and studies do show, that consumers don't necessarily desire the national brand as much as they used to. So like I'm going to have you discuss in the discussion board, it is more product specific and consumer specific. So there's less financial risk when you have a national brand. And let's think about why for a second. When you have a national brand product, you are going to purchase it from the vendor and sell it in your store. So all you're paying really is that purchase price. And if it doesn't sell, you can clearance it out and not order it anymore. We'll talk about how with store brands in just a second, there's a much higher financial risk. So we'll talk about why it is when we get there, but there is a less financial risk with national brands. So moving on to some limitations, things that retailers have to consider as well. Having a national brand in your store does limit flexibility a little bit because national brand vendors are able to negotiate and dictate how their products are displayed, advertised, and priced. So an example here, and I'm not saying this is true, but just as an example, Kellogg's might go to Kroger and say, yes, you can have our cereal in your store, but it has to be on the eye level shelf in the cereal aisle. You cannot put our cereals on the bottom shelf, right? And Kellogg's would do that because they want the consumers to see their branded product first as they're walking down the aisle. But again, that does limit the flexibility that the retailer has. Another limitation to a national brand is that it does have lower margins for the retailer, meaning that the retailer makes less money per product sold on a national brand product. And the reason here is that you do compete with price. So Kellogg's cereal is sold at multiple retailers. It's sold at Kroger, it's sold at Walmart, it's sold at Target, it's sold at CVS. And so if Kellogg's Frosted Flakes are $2.49 at Walmart and Kroger is selling them for $2.99, consumers are going to go to Walmart to get their cereal. So you do have to be very aware of what the competitors are pricing their cereal, and so it keeps that price a little bit lower for the retailer and that they make less profit per product. So again, you're vulnerable to those competitive pressures because you have to be aware of the same product being sold at multiple retailers. So now let's talk about some advantages and limitations of that private label product. So the advantages here, one, you have unique merchandise. You cannot get it anywhere else. And so therefore it does boost exclusivity and store loyalty. So consumers know that they can only get it at your store, and so you're going to have some loyal customers. Having a private label makes it difficult for customers to price shop because they literally cannot get that exact product anywhere. They could get a similar product, but that makes it hard to price shop because it's not exactly the same. And so it does give you an opportunity to have some higher margins. So with private label, you can set the price based on the cost that it took for you to make it. And so you don't have to worry about those competitive pressures and keeping your price low. Now, the limitations, the first is that you do have to make a significant investment in design and manufacturing. We'll talk a little later in this chapter about that investment, but you have to think if you are designing a product from scratch, you have to have the research and development team hired to come up with that product. You do have to invest in either your own manufacturing facility or you do have to work with a third-party manufacturer to produce it. So those costs can be incredibly high. A limitation is that you need to have an expertise in developing a brand. So again, you have to have those employees that you're paying who can develop a brand that a customer is going to become hopefully loyal to. It is very difficult to sell excess merchandise. If you make a brand new cereal and you start selling it in your grocery store and consumers don't like it and they're not buying it, you probably had to manufacture 1 million boxes. And so if you have all this excess merchandise sitting around, you might not be able to sell it and recoup your costs there. So that is definitely a limitation. And then finally, a limitation is that it is less desirable for customers. Again, I put an asterisk here because I think that is more closely related to specific products or specific consumer preferences. But generally speaking, those private labels do have a lower desirability amongst customers. So post in the discussion board your thoughts on private label versus national brand, and we'll pop back in part 2 of this lecture and start talking about how we buy national brand and merchandise.